It's also not.
Relax.
Big foil.
So Senate Education Committee, after a short break, I believe we are with, I know we're doing that section, some things, but we're about to start section 4. That's the I believe one, right?
Yes.
Yep.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. And we're actually going to skip right over section 4. So we left off on page 20, the very, about line 6-ish. But you did not make any changes on pages 20 through 35 for this draft. So that pages 20 through 35 are the school construction sections.
Yes.
So, section 4, statement of policy reads like intent. And I'm wondering if we really want a second intent paragraph. That's kind of how it reads to me, but that's just.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. You did make changes here, but it was deleting language.
We deleted half the statement.
Yes, deleted half the statement of policy.
So and this is just a recommendation. So is intent should be upfront from the original bill, or should sections of intent be embedded throughout the bill? To me, it seems it would be upfront, but that's.
So this is actually, you're adding a statement of policy to Title 16. So you're adding a section in Title 16. And so starting on page 20, line 7, under that reader assistance heading, these are all of the statutes that you're adding to Title 16. So I would suggest that you keep the statement of policy in this section because it flows with the rest of the sections following it in your state aid for school construction sections. But there would be nothing legally wrong with pulling that section out and putting it somewhere else.
I think we're good.
Yeah. So I suggest we jump to page 35 unless anyone had any questions, comments, feelings.
About school construction.
Yes. Okay. So page 35, line 6, section 13. This is the tuition through school section. And a couple changes here. One, you'll see on line 10 and 11, page 35, the language and independent school meeting education quality standards is struck.
And let me explain that one. We've been trying with this bill to limit the tuition program and independent schools able to receive tuition through bills in the state was integral to the system. And thus we had the language about it has to be within the supervisory union with non-operating grades, and it has to have had 25% of its Vermont students, Vermont resident students, be tuition students in 23-24 school year. This language actually takes it all back. Just got picked up over the weekend. This actually would undermine the whole concept of trying to limit choice to where it's integral to the system that would make it available anywhere if you just went to the quality standards. So we realized that this was a proposal to limit choice to where it's integral to the system, and this undermines that. It's language that doesn't add anything at this point, and except for doing that. So the idea is to get rid of them and to make the language do what we said, which is limiting.
From where to where? Whole section?
No, just to underline it.
We're on page 35, lines 10 and 11.
It's struck.
Yeah.
Just an independent school meeting education quality standards. And then additionally, on page 36, line 1, the requirement that a school have at least 25%, or improved independent school have at least 25% of its student enrollment composed of publicly tuitioned students. We added the modifier of Vermont resident student.
So why do we go from 50 to 25 and not somewhere in between that? It just 20. It's 25 of it.
There's nothing, I guess you could say there's nothing magic about either number.
Okay.
Just the 51% just seemed like way
Yeah.
high. And so it just cut in half. It's sort of with the theory that if a school has less than 25% or more, it's integral to the system. Less than 25% probably not integral to the system. And not dependent on tuition to be successful in its own right because they're surviving with, mostly non-tuition students. It's a line drawing exercise. And there's always an element of like a little bit of drawing a strong line.
Right.
Yes.
So why does the line need to be drawn? And why is 25, you're explaining why 25% is, not dependent on, but so it's still part of the ecosystem. Curious why the line needs to be drawn as opposed to accepting the current status of it.
Good. Leave it that way. This was an attempt to meet the House partway, meet the people who, this was an attempt to just create a proposal that kind of really met the needs of students and those areas where it's integral, but otherwise, let it go and let's do it. So it was I can't give you an answer beyond that. It was, and I just, in my head, I've used that language of integral to the system.
Do we know, when we make these kinds of decisions, do we know what the ramification is, like which schools would lose their students?
I have not looked at, I know that I know the number of schools would no longer be eligible. And I actually saw one number, but I don't want to say it, because I haven't verified it, but it's maybe half.
Can we get testimony?
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't tried it.
It's this sharply limits choice.
I would,
Oh, sorry. I'm confused. I've heard a few times that it limits choice. Are you comparing that to the current system
Yes.
or what the House does?
Well, the house basically is killing choice.
So this appears to expand choice compared to what the House.
The house, yes.
Okay.
So the house would effectively kill choice. This takes it from its current to substantially constricted.
I've called it a lateral move from the House's proposal because I think it's really important that we limit public dollars going to private schools where there's a fully functional system, where there's, the limitation that you had put on that it has to be a non-operating component of the district. That's really important to me because otherwise it's just siphoning away students and resources from a public school that's meeting all of the rules that we continue to set every year that they should be meeting, rather than historically just there are lots of academies in the state that had to make the decision around school construction. Decades of school construction money, whether or not they would benefit more from becoming public or staying an academy, but they're still integral to the system that they operate.
It's mostly, it's frequently very rural areas that benefit from choice. You should recall that testimony because choice and but exclusively it's you should recall the map that I put out with the 9 zones and 3 of them being retaining the SU model in order to retain voice of voice. It's in 3 geographic areas where it's integral to the system.
Question. I don't know how big of an ask this might be for JFO, but I'm looking at the E 2.1 scenario. I don't think there are any approved independent schools on there, but is it, I guess it's not a question for you, Julia, but is it in the realm of possibility to get a financial analysis of 25% compared to the 51% and how the weights that are being proposed would affect those schools compared to the other schools?
So Julia Richter, JFO, my understanding, and this is where I will defer to Beth, is that this is not changing the amount of tuition going to independent schools. Beth, is that?
I think, the sections that are up on the screen, correct, but I think in John's sections there is.
Okay, sorry, could you rephrase your,
Yeah, I
Question?
think I'm still trying to figure out what my question is too, but I'm just trying to get a more in-depth picture as to how this will affect all of the schools financially and the districts financially that are potentially going to be encompassed by either this 25% proposal or the 51% proposal. Because I'm looking at this printout, which is super helpful, but it also doesn't include any of the approved independent schools.
so the printout that you're looking at, are all of the current law districts. So included in that printout are non-operating school districts. The tuition, either some or all of their students to either other public schools or independent schools. So what the printout that you're looking at is, regardless of which grades a school district under current law operates, the amount of funding that would be allocated to that school district in its entirety per the foundation formula. It's not getting into within a district allocation of funds or how many funds would be flowing to certain schools.
That makes sense. Thank you.
If you're interested, we can look into the data that we have in terms of the tuitioning data and think about analysis that we could do that could be helpful. I do think that would be a question that the AOE should be able to come in and testify to pretty readily about, I would imagine, but I don't want to presume, but that they have that kind of information in terms of tuitioning students and what schools have which percentage. I don't have that data.
No, that is helpful. I think at the heart of my question is I'm just trying to figure out if there's any sort of significant financial impact between 25% compared to 51%, or if it's just not significant. That's all I'm trying to get at.
I think that at the end of the day, like when we put this into a fiscal note, you'll see written there that ultimately it will depend on outstanding policy decisions, specifically district boundaries, right? So we don't know which districts are going to be operating, which students are going to be tuitioned, or those other parameters. So we don't know. It would depend on those boundaries, which still haven't been set.
Thank you.
Would you like to move on? So we're still on page 36. We're in subdivision 5 now, line 6. So I believe the last draft you looked at had a limit of just bordering states or provinces. And this amendment is saying that you could tuition to a public or independent school located within 25 miles of the Vermont, that should be border, in a bordering state or province, provided that the school is approved under the laws of that state or province and complies with the other pieces of current law.
So what I raised last time was wanting to make sure that we don't set stricter standards for students on where they go in the state than where they go out of the state. So C and D of this section should apply to 5. And I didn't realize they hadn't applied until the end of the discussion.
So so that they, would have to be in a,
You're coming from a non-operating.
have to have 25%
Yeah.
tuition students in order to.
Mhm. And I think we can send that to finance that way. I've talked to, senators from sparsely populated areas who have more of a public partnership with reciprocal schools in the New Hampshire side. But I don't want to leave here with a bigger hole for what you can do out of state than in state.
It's fine. Once you figure out how to do it, but
So, just to be clear, if we're looking at page 35. Line 15 is located within either. This applies for school, so no out-of-state school is going to do that. So what you are
Yeah.
asking is that the student be a resident of a supervisory district that does not operate? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that would be tying the same limitations to the students going out of state, wouldn't it?
No, because subdivision C on line 15 on page 35 is about the school.
Okay, but I get that part mechanically, but
So there,
C is still, you could still say the student in that location does not have access to a public school.
right, so, okay, I hear what you're trying to do.
well, make sure that we're on that, because the tuition being in Vermont only happens in non-operating districts. So the student coming from Vermont would by definition be from non-operating district.
Is that true?
Yes. Well, there are caveats to anything. There is an allowance for school boards to approve tuition and to operate a school if it's in the best interest of the student. You haven't, this bill, there's nothing in the sections that I'm responsible for,
Mhm.
in the sections that John is responsible for, the sections that Kirby is responsible for, or in anything that passed the House that changes the tuitioning system
Mhm.
mechanics. So the current law would still apply to all the changes you're making here,
Mhm.
and that includes family choice. So the family gets to pick where they go within the limits of the law, and you are making limits here in section
Mhm.
828. And the option for school boards to approve tuition if it's in the best interest of the student, et cetera. None of those statutes have been changed.
Because I don't know what else is happening, I'd either like to reiterate that they have to be in a district that is otherwise not operating. For that, for its grade set or whatever level of school, or we would cut out independent school. And just say a public school on the border, because that seems to be the bigger issue is people who want to go to public school that they have a
Yeah,
relationship.
I think it is the case as we listen to that testimony from, Income Choice in particular, we
Mhm.
talked about, that most of those kids will go to public schools.
Mhm.
What we have to be careful about, I would argue, is that there's a number of kids who cross the border from New Hampshire to go to St. Johnsbury.
Right.
We want to make sure that we don't set up a situation where New Hampshire would then say, well, if you're not going to let Vermont kids go to an independent school, in New Hampshire, then we're not going to let our kids go to St. Johnsbury Academy. And that would just be too bad. It's not,
Yeah. It would be too bad for the
Yeah.
kids for family.
Yeah.
Right, is what we're saying.
so we just have to be careful that as we put this together, we're thinking about how
Yeah.
to not invite something negative. But on the other hand, if your goal is to have it come as close as we can to having mirror what we do, I think figuring out how to do that. I think if we were to say, we'll just play this out, that whether this can work linguistically for the bill, that we could use 25 miles, and we could also add a requirement that that school have more than 25% of its students be tuition students. That would be the same language as Vermont, whether they come from, it would be 95% New Hampshire and a handful from Vermont, I suspect.
So I'm asking for both, because the bare minimum for me is the 25%, but I like both, that they're not leaving an operating district to go across the
Yeah.
border to.
Yeah, they can't under Vermont.
Is that true?
Except,
Under this bill, they would not, if they had an operating district.
I don't know how to answer
Yeah.
under this bill. 'Cause
Right.
He's making changes.
Well, I want to reiterate it, the intent, because the supervisory union piece could
No.
complicate that.
what we want to be careful about from the perspective of a public school student
Yeah.
is that we're not, because right now, a student can petition their public school board
Mhm.
to go to another school if their needs are not being met by the public school that's available. I
That-
want to make sure that if that right school for that kid was in New Hampshire, would be close, we would be proposing that opportunity.
But are we foreclosing that opportunity for a student in Vermont
No, you can still petition your board. That's a key.
for an independent school?
No, well, for any school.
For any
You can
school.
Petition your board to go to a school out of district because the board agrees with the student that the district is not able to meet the needs of that student, or the student would be significantly better off by going to somewhere else out of district. It happens rarely within the public system, but it's something I think you'd want to be careful not to foreclose. Because for a handful of students, I think it could, it's something important. It might be they're going to a different public school under the district.
Well, right. I mean, even as my understanding, even the governor's proposal closed off tuitioning to independent schools outside of the state.
Remember,
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can certainly look it up right now.
I believe that was the original proposal.
Yeah.
So I'm trying not to open back up everything within 25 miles of the border.
Yeah.
So I'm asking people to work with me here because otherwise,
well, I'm
we
suggesting.
should close it all
I'm
off.
suggesting you do 25% tuition because that
Okay.
mirror. that-
but I would like to make sure that for the most part, they don't have a public. They're not in a fully operating district at that point.
the Student,
They shouldn't have more opportunity to leave an operating district than a student going within the state.
I don't, if you were to change on page 36, line 6, if you were to change the requirements in order to a school, so what I was focused on when I was talking about the schools, that this whole statute is about schools, it's not about students. So I would need to find the right place. I don't know that this is the right statute. But if you were to say, keep this as is, a public or independent school located within 25 miles of the Vermont border and a bordering state or province, you still haven't changed the student piece of public tuitioning, which is who is allowed to tuition.
Right.
And those students automatically have to be in non-operating districts, with the exception that would apply to anyone if you petition your school board and the school board says, yes, we will pay your tuition to go somewhere else.
So then why don't we just say a public school located within 25 miles of the border, or a district that has a reciprocal agreement with a district within Vermont? That, and then Senator Beck can work on it from there, because that's the concern, it's just reciprocity. Like, why do we need to, if someone could petition to go to an independent school outside of the state, it doesn't have to be within 25 miles. That means they need some special opportunity.
and we should be.
Then I don't want to mess with that. I want to mess with a public school or a school that has a reciprocal agreement with schools in Vermont.
I don't know if we have reciprocal agreements.
That's not a concept in
Yeah,
state law.
yeah.
So I just want to remind you that therapeutic schools are eligible for tuition, whether they're located in Vermont or another state or country. And so that if we're talking about a student who needs a specialized setting, that already exists in this language.
So then we could just say a public school. Because if they need to petition for an independent school, they can do that under a separate process.
The petition, so if a school district is operating, but let's just pull up the law. Look at it together. Okay. So here's the statute, section 822, that requires a school district to maintain one or more approved high schools in which high school education is provided for resident students, unless essentially the school district is organized to provide education in some other way. So, this is the exception here. A school district on subsection C, a school district may both maintain a high school and furnish high school education by paying tuition to a public school as in the judgment of the school board may best serve the interests of the students.
Is this all limited to high school education?
Yes, there's a separate statute for
Okay.
elementary school.
Okay.
To an approved independent school, if the board judges that a student has unique educational needs that cannot be served within the district or at a nearby school, and then the judgment of the board is final in regard to the institution the students may attend at public cost. So this is the student considerations. And then section 828 are all of the schools that once the student receives approval, okay, we're gonna pay your
Mhm.
tuition. Then 828 dictates the list of schools the student could pick from. They could pick from a public school located in Vermont. They could pick from an approved independent school that's located in Vermont, etc. They could pick from a tutorial program, an approved education program.
Wait, so can I, 2 is the critical one, right? Like, for what?
This is the approved independent schools located in Vermont.
Yes.
So you are an operating district.
Mm-hmm.
You are a student in Burlington. You go to your school board and you say, I have unique needs and I would like you to pay for my tuition to go elsewhere. The school district says yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now we look at section 828 to figure out which educational programs a school district is allowed to pay tuition to.
Mm-hmm.
That limits who the student can pick, what the student can pick from.
Mm-hmm.
So they could pick from a public school, an approved independent school located in Vermont that meets the rest of subdivision 2.
Okay, so you have to be both in a non-operating district and 25% of your.
Or an approved independent school located in Vermont.
Yes.
And then if it's an approved independent school located out of Vermont, the student's choice and the district's ability to pay for that choice are limited to whatever you guys decide on subdivision 5. So current law is just any independent school in another state or country that's approved under the laws of that state or country.
Right. So I would make this section more restrictive than being able to go to another private school in Vermont. I don't know why we would kind of encourage more use of tuitioning outside of the state than 25 miles of the state. Not just the 25% threshold, but you know, that they've essentially exhausted other options, that they're in a non-operating district. But in my mind, I don't know why we would send independent school dollars out of the state. Most of these agreements are with public schools in areas that are sparsely populated.
There's no agreements though. So the, so what we're trying to do here is pull it in.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing that some kids on the border, in particular in the Northeast Kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
really benefit from being able to go across the border. And the only thing that I think we want to make, at least in my mind, that we want to make sure we're doing is doing this in a way that won't have New Hampshire retaliate
Mm-hmm.
and say, well, that all the kids who go to, in particular, St. Johnsbury Academy no longer can. And just because that would be too bad, it's not gonna.
It would be too bad, I guess, like
But
that
why
would
don't
be
we-
a political problem for them.
But why don't we, why don't we do what we've been talking about here? Let's just try on 25 miles and 20, in the school that to which they choose to go has to have the same 25% of tuition students that we're talking about in Vermont. That it would be,
At this, in the last school year,
I think it would be apples to apples.
at least let's make it apples to apples
Yeah.
to start with.
Yeah. Okay.
And that would be going back to the 24 school year.
And yeah, we'd have the same, you know, your point about not wanting to make it easier to go out of state than in state, or have different, make it apples to apples, so the 25 and the 25. Yeah, okay.
Got it. Then see. Didn't make any changes to the tuition transition language. No changes, I'm on page 37 now, section 15. State Board of Education rules and reports, no changes there. Page 38.
So for you, John. State Board of Education. Yeah, I'm trying to look up. Section 15.
Yeah.
The 2200 series,
Yes.
why specifically are we putting the 2200 series into this bill for State Board of Education to review? It sounds like a comprehensive review, and I'm just wondering what the goal is. It may be well worthy, but it just stands out as kind of like, there's something else to do.
If I may, this is
Yeah.
actually not a policy decision, this is a legal.
Okay.
So there's two separate sections regarding state board rules. Section 15, subsection A, is saying, State Board of Education, you need to update the Rule 2200 series only because we changed the law in section 13, and you need to make sure that those rules match the law. Section 16 on page 38 is that overall review of all of the rules, the sunset review, which ones need updating, which ones are no longer needed, and then report back to you all with a plan for how to do that. We don't know what they're gonna find when we do that, when they do that review, but we do know on page 37, section 15, subsection A, that you all have changed the law and we want the rules to track the law, the statute. That's the only place. There were places in the House bill that made other changes to other areas of Title 16, and the House asked the state board to update those corresponding rule series too. The only reason Rule 2200 series appears in section 15 with a specific request for an update is because it's the only piece of Title 16 you updated.
Thank you. So can I ask in the next, whatever, couple of days, that State Board hopefully still weigh in on this, on what's doable, or what the timeline is correct, enough runway and money to do this effort? It's not a
Which part? The
So
other.
State Board of Education rules report, section 15, and then section 16.
Yeah, section 16 is a different kettle of fish, right?
Well, both combined.
No, I understand. Yeah.
So State Board of Education, my perception is that they're undermanned, underfunded, underloved. And we need to make sure that they're fully capable of doing this before December 2026. For section 16.
Okay, I can call the chair, we can maybe get the chair on.
I mean, it doesn't need any more than 10 minutes. If they say, thumbs up,
Yeah.
good to go, let's do it.
Yeah, so we know now we do have to, I think, parse this. Because the sections 14 and 15 are, I'll use the term loosely here, I think a little simpler. And less of an issue, subject to check. Section 16, however, is a major undertaking, right? So we have to parse them, I think, as we analyze this. You recall that we put in the budget request letter, we suggested money for the board, partially for this section 16. And we suggested 50,000 in order to have them get started on this sunset review. That was following a discussion with the chair. And we also suggested some other additional monies for the purpose of rulemaking. So let me see if we get the chair on that. Let the points are with us.
Okay. Did we get to section 17 yet? Or no?
No, I haven't done that. But we're about to.
Section 17 is reflecting a change, that, the language you had before just had the Agency of Education Giving recommendations to the State Board of Education regarding proficiency-based statewide graduation requirements. And now on section 17, page 38, line 16, the language asks AOE to submit a written report to the General Assembly and the State Board of Education at the same time with those recommended standards for statewide proficiency-based graduation requirements. And then the only change on page 39 is actually removal of that last, there was subdivision 4 here after line 20 regarding therapeutic schools. And the request to me was to weave it somehow into section 18, which is the larger special education delivery report. And I've done that on, trying to find it here, on page 43. These are all of the things that the report on special education delivery needs to include.
Thank you.
And on page 43, line 20, I've kind of added that old subdivision 4 regarding the oversight of therapeutic schools. I've added it to this section. So recommendations for the oversight of therapeutic schools within the school governance framework, both at the state and local level. And then the language that's not highlighted as part of subdivision F subdivision F was included already. And then no other changes. I added the word cost where it had been cut off. But otherwise, no other changes to these sections.
So I was talking to some folks on page 40. So I was talking to some folks after our discussion about this because I don't think adequate staffing is the same as workforce shortage. Adequate staffing is more like a management, how many people are on the floor at the same time kind of thing. Workforce shortages, there is no one in this pipeline for this workforce. They were very different questions to get recommendations based on. So, I mean, maybe it's something around the drivers of growth of extraordinary expenditures. I think we need to say like addressing the root causes of the workforce shortage in special education or something. Like, I don't know how we're going to get useful stuff about staffing levels. What we need is how to build a pipeline of people to take these jobs.
It's partially there. I'm just reading it with focusing on this for the first time. Partially there in line 12, although not entirely, recommended changes to structure, practice, and law with the goal of getting to adequate. But so you want to change? I mean, I really, for everyone's talking, you want to just make sure it gets to why it's happening.
Yeah, adequate staffing needs. What does that mean if there's no workforce? So I don't know if people want to keep that one the way it is. I don't care, but if anyone's attached to that number 4, otherwise, I can wordsmith that, but it would be something about addressing the workforce shortage in special education service delivery to meet.
So how do we address what changes are necessary? What do we have to do?
Yeah, the root causes of the workforce shortage.
Okay.
So it's just what we did in childcare.
No, I don't know.
Was right.
I maybe leave 4 and add something specific.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yes.
And then no other changes to the special education sections. Section 19 was the strategic plan section. Section 20 on page 45 is adding a position to AOE. And then section 21 is brand new.
Just want that on page 43.
I'm
I
sorry.
think you just want on page 43.
I think we just went through that.
Oh, we did?
The oversight of therapeutic
Yeah.
schools within school
Okay,
governance.
okay.
That I took that from.
I remember now.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, okay.
Can I ask a question about section? So is the from everybody's understanding, is the intent of this one position to focus on the transformation process or to specifically develop a 3-year strategic plan for some other goal? I'm curious what the product really is. Okay, so let me take the perspective of if this is about the transformation plan, one body is not sufficient. They've got to step up, get themselves ready to embark on a completely different environment. And I would submit that this would be, that they would need more personnel in this, and this isn't coming, haven't been that anything from AOE or anything to that regard. I just sense that one person is not enough to effectively initiate a program of this significance.
How are we doing with the plan right now?
This is a CTE position.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Section 20 is very specific here, and it's a policy choice. So on line 46, on page 46, line 1, the position is specific to the implementation of the 3-year strategic plan required under section, and I need to update that internal reference.
Oh,
So section it should be 19. So the strategic plan, this is what this position would be doing. They would be,
So it's special ed.
yes, but this is all a policy decision for you all.
Okay,
you're saying one person for special ed strategic plan.
so one recommendation to clarify. Section 20, if section 20 is really referring to section 19, special education.
Yes.
That somewhere in paragraph A, it says,
It does. Implementation of the 3-year strategic plan required under, and I need to update that internal reference. It should be section 19.
okay,
So it refers directly to that.
okay. All right. And I guess that's fine. I would just make it very simple and say special education 3-year strategic plan covered under, make it very clear. But my real point is that if AOE needs some support to get this transition up and moving with the proper inertia, that they come and they ask for personnel. And I'll leave it at that, because having not seen any language like that anywhere in here, it's a wish and a prayer, and hopefully it works out. I really think, having seen a lot of projects stand up from scratch, this is not just something that you're going to pull out a hide and make it happen. It's not stretch.
This is a house section, just frankly, that.
Yeah, but there's not nowhere else in here. Is there any other, or part one of this, any other conversation about a transition team?
I think you're right. There's no other positions appropriated in here. There is, excuse me while I scroll, and this may not assuage your concerns, but I just wanted to point out, so out of special education in the report. Let's see. Yes. So in section 17 on page 39, one of the reports due back from AOE is what kind of, so on line 17, the report shall include a detailed description of how the agency will provide support and consolidation to the field and an estimated cost associated with such work. So I think it's built in that you guys are hearing about that next year, but certainly it's a policy choice on whether or not you want to make those directives this year, for sure.
I'm just simply submitting that if AOE is listening and they need a transition team, that they should really get vocal quick.
Section 21 is brand new. And I made these changes literally before I ran in here at 1 o'clock. So I can already tell I should have put a reader assistant setting in here to alert you all that this is about career and technical education. And what it does is it amends section 1546 in Title 16, which is part of Chapter 37, which is the technical education, current technical education chapter, Title 16, related to comprehensive high schools and the amount of tuition they can charge. And so H 454 is passed by the House, and the version that you all are working on, the Senate proposal of amendment, does not touch career and technical education, both the system delivery, the governance piece, and the funding of it. This section is making a somewhat conforming amendment here. So current law is comprehensive high schools charge and receive tuition pursuant to section 824 of this title, which is the high school tuition section. The bill in the sections that John walked you through to begin with actually repeal that section so that there's only one tuition section. So we're updating that. And I believe the concept is that the money follows the student for tuition in general. And so this section says, okay, comprehensive high schools, you're gonna, you charge tuition based on section 823, which in your Senate proposal of amendment is the base amount and all of the weights applicable to that student. And then this section says, the amendment here on page 47 says, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, an approved independent school functioning as an area career and technical education center, which that language is the same language that appears in the tuitioning section. So I'm trying to be consistent from section to section in Title 16. May charge a sending school district a CTE fee, and I can already tell I need to wordsmith this a little bit more. But a sending school district a CTE fee of not more than 10% of the base amount contained in subdivision 4001-16 of this title, in addition to the tuition charge pursuant to subsection B of this section, which is referring to section 823, which is again the base amount and the weights applicable to each student. So I believe this is supposed to be 10% of the base amount on a per pupil basis. So if you stick with this concept and this continues to travel in this amendment, then I would amend the language accordingly.
So to be clear about this one, this is frankly Senator Beck. The House didn't do anything with this because the House start date is so far in the future. So it's trying to think this through later. CTEs are inherently more expensive to operate, and they tend to have smaller classes. They tend to be more expensive. Under current law, St. J and LI can charge whatever they want. They just simply set their tuition has to be unified tuition. Tuition plus the cost of running the CTE. So the St. J and LI tuition that gets charged is higher than any other independent schools because they run comprehensive CTEs, and this limits it for the first time. It's just saying 10%, which of the base, or depending what the number is, $59 or something, or on I think it's an ABM basis, right?
I don't know off the top of my head.
But it limits it, but it recognizes that all CTEs. So all the CTE money is already in the 1.88 billion. It's now just making clear that St. J and LI can stay sort of at the level they are now. And at the same time, in a way they've never had a limit before, it limits it to 10%. So I think it's frankly, it's wholly reasonable. I worry that the 10% may not be high enough to actually, but Senator Beck thinks it's okay. He knows that area. So that's the idea. Just keep it whole. But put a limit on it so people know.
I'm fine with it. I told Senator Beck and I'll tell others. I hope very soon we can look into helping students access CTE tuitioning dollars to get workforce development with nonprofits that where they're in an area that's at capacity. I think the sad thing we heard this year, maybe here or economic development, is that they can go to a CTE center that has space, but they have to get their own transportation. Well, that's a lot to ask the student from, Chittenden County or Rutland to drive to Regents on their own. That's a lot. And we have really good nonprofits that have just lost their AmeriCorps funding that are being gutted. that are building homes and doing important things for our state. And I'd love for them to be able to become accredited to provide CTE credits. And I wish we could do it this way.
We ended up going through this without suggesting any additional changes. Right?
I had a couple around out-of-state
Oh,
independent
yes,
schools.
yes.
And did you want to limit that 25% or apply the 25% to out-of-state public schools as well, or just independent schools? Okay.
So it's out.
Yep. I need to update an internal reference.
It's softening the map language so that it has a choice about considering supervisory.
Yep, and I'm taking the membership of this task force from 6 members to 8 members. Right, 4 from the House, 4 from the Senate.
Couldn't we have? I'm really worried if we end now. I don't know what we're doing.
Well,
I'm really worried that we haven't had the opportunity as a committee to talk about the supplemental spending piece. That's a huge education policy. It's a huge education equity policy. And I've been trying to work on some language, but I don't know if it makes sense to talk about that before the committee's up to speed. And as I look at that section, there's just a lot in here that's education policy. And I don't know if we're gonna have like a really long night with John or something, but like there's stuff about interstate districts and all kinds of stuff that I think is stuff that's education policy.
I've been operating under the assumption that that is the territory of finance. So we've been.
Supplemental spending.
No, I'm not arguing.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying I've been operating on that under the assumption that the supplemental spending is their turf. And I understand that on one level, everything is policy.
I'll just say
But-
this, many other states that have supplemental spending, it's for very specific purposes. And ours is carte blanche, you can spend 10% more. That easily in 2 or more years creates the same inequities over again. That allows some districts who want to spend up to 10% more than other districts year over year.
Now, I've been assuming also that any additional spending that the finance committee allowed would be limited to 10%, which would at least limit that concern. And also that it would have to meet the requirements. So the bringing decision would have to be equally easy or hard for any district to raise the money.
But I guess that's why we did the foundation formula is you can see how inequitable things were before and how it's just hard to get some districts to be willing to spend 10% more and you're going to recreate inequities. That is an education policy in my mind. And I just don't think the bill can leave this committee until we have some guardrails about what you can use the 10%. You shouldn't be able to just fund your general education program because we will absolutely have different outcomes and different student experiences based on just some districts that will vote for a 10% more budget increase every year and others that
So how would you like to go about this? Like to have John walk us through that section? This is John, I guess, right?
It's John needs to walk us through if we're all going to understand where it's at. Tammy Colby does believe there are many guardrails in other states, and I've asked her again if she could send me those. I've started trying to Google them. That was very fruitful. But it's pretty clear from a quick Google search that states have guardrails. They have very specific ways that you can go above and beyond.
I mean, totally. I just want to be careful about territory, but putting that aside, I have no objection to what you're thinking about and doing that. Something I frankly haven't given it too much thought beyond thinking A, it's them, B, it's limited, and C, it'll have to be the requirements. But if you want to
10% is
add another level of, I get it, and
And I would say, what I really am sympathetic to is within the first 2 or so years that this rolls out, districts will just have a hard time, like we're smoothing things out. But we might not put guardrails up the first 2 years and just say, everything's new, like you need extra money to figure things out, then ask your community for it. But beyond that, voters should be asked to vote on very specific reasons to increase their budget, not just like, we need another 10%, you know? Many states have it tied to specific student outcomes or specific project related needs.
So that's John, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have equity defined?
All the definitions are in that second section as well. So
It does define. it.
I don't know, but
If that's one,
the definitions are really important to education policy and they're all in
because
the back.
I feel that, or not feel, I believe that is a big issue that everybody being equitable. What does that mean? Now we're deciding that 14,000 some odd dollars, that gives you equitable education, and I believing that is what that's saying, so that when somebody goes, hey, my student isn't getting the same student that student's getting, well, they're getting the same funding. So as the state says, yes, you are, and that kind of covers us from Brigham, doesn't it? Because, okay, so if we define it, can that help?
No.
There is no definition?
Equitable is a moving target. Substantially, that's why the Supreme Court didn't even say equitable, substantially equal. And they took pains to explain that absolute equality was neither required nor even practical. I hear two things in Brigham. When I hear Brigham being discussed that drive me bonkers as an attorney. One is, there's no factor test in Brigham. So when we're talking about Brigham compliance, we're actually talking about compliance with the state constitution. And what that looks like is going to depend on the facts of the case. It's going to depend on the legislative conversation around it. And it's going to, quite frankly, depend on the skill of the attorneys who are bringing the case, because you can have a slam dunk of a case, but if people don't make the right arguments, then the case isn't going to go anywhere. So that's one piece about Brigham. The other piece is, I don't read Brigham as standing for the theory that equal money equals equal educational opportunities. I think what will happen is, even if everyone has access to the same money, and I'm using air quotes here, or that money is raised on a statewide basis, et cetera, if the state has created a system that results in enough equity that the Supreme Court believes that the system violates the Common Benefits Clause or the Education Clause, regardless of where the money is and how the money is accessed, then you're just not in compliance with the Constitution. So some of being quote unquote Brigham compliant or compliant with the Common Benefits Clause and the Education Clause is a finance piece, but some of it is the educational policies and the decisions that are made on how to spend that money. But ultimately, you all are on the hook as the state for creating a system that leads to substantial equality. But what substantial equality looks like is going to be a moving target. And I don't think it's possible to define that from a legal perspective. You can certainly make policy decisions or put policy arguments in there. I would be very cautious about defining what equality means.
Part of education.
Yes.
That, like you said, it's always a moving target, and that means it's always going to be an and if this all comes down to what people have for money to fight the system to say, this is what I want. And so this is just a question for me, is that you truly believe that we can't define it, that it would set in the state standard, this is what we're defining, as long as schools are meeting this, they're succeeding in giving an equitable, equal education. Just because you can give 4 language classes and I can only give 2. well, I wanted Spanish, you didn't have Spanish, you had French and German. Oh, I'm not getting,
I think any Supreme Court analysis is going to go beyond just the number of language classes, right? They're gonna
but
be looking
it's,
at.
Andy,
bigger
that's
picture.
just one scenario. But because it could be from tech, it could be any career minded.
I will just say that there is a line in Brigham that very clearly states this notion of somehow providing a minimally adequate education is enough, is not something that the Supreme Court has condoned. And so I don't know. I think it would depend on what your definition of equality looks like. And it may be that what the state considers minimally adequate education and everyone has access to it and therefore we're all good is not actually providing substantially equal educational opportunities depending on how that money's raised, how the money's allocated, how different communities are making choices about that. Quite frankly, what I just described is the Brigham decision. So this is not easy. It's exciting, right? You all are transforming Vermont.
Sounds like one district better be the best.
But it's also hard. It's not easy. When you're looking at constitutional principles, this isn't a, did you read some of the Miranda rights? This is not as black and white as that.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, somebody will be here 20 years from now. Like not me, you know, that will look back on these decisions. And we had an adequacy formula built into Act 60. We've known what substantially equal should look like for a long time. If I look ahead 20 years and I see that some districts could decide to spend 10% extra year over year, we have completely missed the point of what we're trying to accomplish in decades to come. We will look back and say we did have an adequacy formula, and then we let communities overspend based on their appetite to do so, and now we have really different outcomes again.
If we have the opportunity in the next couple of days, is to have a constitutionality sanity check from one of those constitutional scholars on current language at that moment in time, just to make sure that we're not off the river. But if everyone's comfortable that we're not, tell me that we're okay, then
But I think let the council.
I will say I'm not a judge. Only a judge can do that.
Right.
But, yeah.
We don't ask Ledge Council the constitutionality of things.
Well, I can give you an overview and
We can't ask if something we vote on will be deemed unconstitutional. That's not
There's
true.
nobody can answer that.
Right, but we can't even ask Ledge Council.
Yeah.
we can't alter that.
So, Senator Wood,
So I want to say I agree with Senator Heffernan, because it's as complicated and simple as defining equity. And, you know, it comes to the educational quality standards. What's the standard and who's the standard bearer? Who's gonna make sure 20 years from now that the standard we set in establishing this law has been adhered to? Because Act 60 tried to do it and we got so far, in my opinion, we got so far away from it that we're doing what we're doing now because of it. So I think I'd like to get it right.
I would suggest Tammy Colby could at least tell us what other states have done to approach this question
well,
through
you're
the foundation.
yeah, so
And what supplemental spending should look like.
I have no objection to that.
Should I ask
So
her?
ask what?
Ask Tammy to get scheduled to talk about supplemental spending and considerations in equity.
Sure. Let me be, well, before I say that.
Okay.
Why don't you talk to her
Okay.
to start
I'll call her
with,
again.
because,
Yeah,
I don't think you're necessarily meeting resistance here with the
Sure.
concept. So, but give us because I'm only thinking about, we've got so little time.
that's
Uh,
fair.
And, We have to really focus every minute.
Mhm.
Um. So. Yes,
Here we go.
Friday.
What happens then? What's the series of events that occur after that constraints?
Um, well, this is always set by leadership, right? I mean, in the end, it's always set, otherwise we get go July every year. So I'm not being facetious, I'm trying to make just tie it together here that, so leadership has set a adjournment date for, by the end of May. And in order to get there, we get this bill plus, we've been told this bill has to come out of here by Friday.
And then it goes to,
Then it goes to finance. And they are looking, if I understand it right, the concept is it's there for a week. In order to get out and have time for conference days. We have to keep moving. So we have that doing another draft. We've got John wanting some additional numbers. I'm sorry, not John, Ezra. JFO running some additional numbers. We gave a little work to John, so we'll have something to look at tomorrow.
Can you talk about how late you roughly anticipate us going each evening?
I think
Because we have it out Friday, we can't go into Friday evening. That's what you're saying. Can we vote it out Friday evening?
probably, yeah,
I'm gonna book that for a little longer.
yeah. Well, let's hope we are doing our long nights before that. 'Cause
Yeah.
we have to. So what are people thinking about in terms of need within our limited time for crucial testimony or something else to get in there beyond JFO Lunch Council? And so we have wanted to check in with AOE.
For class sizes, was that yours?
We took it out.
You took it out, totally out?
but I think.
I imagine.
I've gotten a lot of pushback from the.
Yeah, same here.
From the PA, that if we don't make decisions on class size, we're setting up the districts for failure, that they'll keep status quo. And that's, the other option is we begin to drive it with a class size boundary and help the future boards make those decisions. That's the.
And that's kind of the same pushback I was getting. It's like, if we had minimum class sizes, there's things we could do in our district that would definitely save money. And if we leave it up to the local, they probably just won't do it. And we're not talking shipping kids hundreds of miles or even 10 miles down the road. It's gonna save that. Nobody's gonna like it in the beginning.
Yeah.
But if their taxes don't go up, they're gonna love it in the end.
So there's two, we should parse this and let's have a discussion.
I'm sorry, do you need me? Okay.
Yeah, I think you've got, yeah, thank you. So here's the alternative way to think about this, at least in my, and by the way, that's the, we're having a discussion. By getting a foundation formula in place, by 2027 with a multiplier that is going to be, just for the sake of discussion, say 3.5%, as opposed to the levels of increase we've been seeing, which has allowed small schools that be there to stay open and allowed for people not to have to make hard decisions. That's going away. If we're staying at 1.88, and by the time it hits, it would be 1.88 times the multiplier, 3.5. I'm making up the 3.5. And then that is the multiplier each year. You're going to find that the downward pressure on districts to make decisions is pretty significant. And frankly, if we will be saving money by definition, because that 3.5, that 1.8 times the multiplier is the dollars. And I look at this as us making the decisions in a one size fits all way. At least it runs counter to my philosophy about how things should operate, which is philosophy. It is philosophy. I think districts we will be by definition saving money. And in some ways, if you live in one county and another county isn't doing a good job, well, that's up to them. But I think they're going to, because the pressure is going to be so. And I think that's a decision. It's a tough decision. I've had, frankly, superintendents say to me, make us do it. I'm not sympathetic. And I think that's the job.
And we will have in cases that we're talking of the school being so secluded that it's not efficient, but it's mandatory that it stays. And that's, I hope people hear that we
It's us to wait.
right.
Us to wait to allow it to happen.
And it will also, the most important thing, it's going to help the child's education. Because if you're in a classroom of 5 to 8, it's already been proven, the teachers have come in and said, if you have at least up to 12, your kids have more people to play with it, more time to help. So
I think what's funny is, I mean, I've been hearing the same pushback from House members and others, and so many of the examples they use are private schools that their kids have gone to, or some kid they know has gone to. Even in very populated Chittenden County, there are those problems with, I can name, 10 schools right now that have problems with class size and number of boys or girls. And those programs are also in danger of shutting down if they're not financially viable. But people make decisions to send their kids to very small environments sometimes for a reason. And if we're sending the same amount of money and saying, you're on a level playing field, if you can manage with the same amount of money, aside from sparsity that other schools are getting, and you want to be small, fine. That actually doesn't change our financial
again, like you
calculation
said,
at
if
all.
they're valuable,
Exactly.
I can't think word viable wouldn't be touching like Lincoln right now. They're very they should go down to Bristol.
Look at how Lincoln does in
But
this.
they haven't. But as soon as they don't become viable, then they have that option to say, okay, now we'll.
Look at how Lincoln does in the
Yeah.
proposal. They lose significantly.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Addison.
want to fairness in Addison,
Addison's not doing well at all.
but some parts of Addison increased, But I really think that if you look at the foundation formula in the districts, it does its job. I look at my district, there are winners and losers. There are people who, are spending quite a bit. There are those who could be more efficient. There are the areas where low-income kids are going to do significantly better. And that's what state education policy should do. And I don't care what size school they go to, especially elementary school. I think a small elementary school is generally fine. And it's what a lot of people choose for their kids. For a number of reasons, so they can be close to work, so they can walk there.
We're not really talking. We're really talking about high school.
But we say that, and when they talk about class size minimums, they're talking about elementary schools.
Well,
We don't have
I
the same
did
problem
talk
in the high schools.
in general to a couple people that it's like, when you look at schools at the end of the day, when you talk about community, and you look at schools at the end of the day, you drive by elementary school, pretty much ghost town. You go by the high school, there's always something, there's night programs going on. The high schools are very more vibrant than elementary schools. Elementary schools do bring in the people, but it's only teachers conference, a play maybe. It's not, it's not as vital as what the high schools bring in for sports, for plays, for adult education, for adult activities. So when we hear this, it's like, yes, elementary schools are important, but if you have some that are super close, like we do in Addison, and it's viable that they get together, and the only reason they don't is because one town says, I just don't want to give it up, but they're complaining about their taxes going up and up and up. It's like, you want to give your child a good education. It's best to have that they're in a classroom of 12 plus, and you're look at Ripton. I use them as a classic. They had 18 kids. And if
But
you
the
want to
school
close it,
district could have done something sooner. They
the
have
town, the
been,
town vote, and if you left the vote to the town, they would have said, let's try to keep that school. But
They're all gonna say
but they're in a bigger district.
Yeah. bigger districts.
Yeah. The bigger districts can say no,
yeah,
we're all paying for it.
they finally did.
Yeah.
But it comes with,
We're just having a discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I
Let
agree.
me give you a real world example that, kind of with my thinking in part. In Bennington County, you got the public schools, we got Mount Anthony, big school, I don't know, 1,000 kids, whatever. A lot of offerings. You know, I was there last night and they were preparing for the big play musical, and, you know, things you can't do in every school. And then we have the Arlington High School. I don't know, 15 miles away, smaller. It wouldn't meet the size requirements set up by the house. And maybe, you know, maybe in the end, I don't know what will happen, you know, with this in the long run, but there are kids from Bennington driving to Arlington because they need that environment, because it's a different environment and it's a smaller school environment, and so they're going there because they're going to be successful when they might not have been successful. And so now in the end, it may not, you know, who knows what will happen, you know, if the dollars shrink under this proposal and they have to make hard choices.
Mhm.
But I'm not, you know, and that's just one example of, you know, 100 across the state, I'm sure,
And
but there's a rationale for it. And I think that decision should be made, as hard as it will be, in a gut wrenching, you know, whatever, either way, at that level.
I keep saying we have this exact debate in Burlington, a densely populated place where we could have found efficiencies by closing 2 of the 6 elementary schools. The community rallied for magnet schools, and now they are a driver of vibrancy in the community. They bring more families in when, frankly, Burlington has some factors going against it right now. So, you know, getting it right with support for local community schools is a huge deal. And I was only chuckling because I needed someone else in the room who has kids my age, because we all go to bed at 8:30. So, you know, the elementary school is definitely shutting down in the evening, but we're also using the playground all weekend. The playgrounds are available for all the people in the community to use. I don't know what you do with that really vital space otherwise. And I don't know why we would put little kids on a bus for longer than we need to go to school. So if you want to set class size minimums for high schools, I'm open to that, but I don't believe in that.
so
for
how
elementary school.
do we make sure that if you have an inefficient elementary school running, that is being, that everybody knows is a tax burden, but they don't want to close it, what do you do now?
In my mind, you give it money for it to be a community school. You put some social services in there, you put a childcare center in there, you reimagine the space. That's what Winooski has done. I mean, you know, Winooski's small by anybody's standards, but it's K through 12 on one campus. That's beautiful and at the center of the community. So you can, if communities have the resources to reimagine, they can do that. But just saying, just close. I mean, you know as well as I do, our rural communities are being told you can't have more housing, so you can't have more kids in the school, so you can't have a rural healthcare clinic. We're resigning our communities to die instead of figuring out how to make their schools an adder to the vibrancy of those rural places.
So
Can we, while we're in discussion, can we talk about good points of the bill and things that I wish that I'm a little disappointed that it wasn't more involved with CTE.
Yeah.
CTE is only an afterthought. It's section 21. My understanding was that the governor wanted this to be wrapped around CTE because we really need that. So, and I don't know how I like the bill. I think it's, well, you know, it was a heavy lift, but what we've done is good, but I'm just disappointed that CTE is a bigger part of it.
I understand, and I've learned a lot about CTE, sitting in this committee this year, and how I think I understand another level than I did, and how critical they are, and how much work we have to do to get CTEs where they need to be. We did add language to the charge of task force to consider CTEs as part of putting together the districts, and that was one of the reasons. You're right, but I would love to have this committee next year with, really dig into CTEs and make them,
And why can't they be under the same district leadership?
they could be. There's three months, everything's complicated, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anything, I'm learning that.
Yeah.
That's the one thing you have to learn.
Everything's complicated, and a change would just have to be thought through carefully because there's so many different structures right now. One model that may, but it depends, I think, on size of districts. One model would be to say that every district, every district should have a CTE. That has implications. And even the governance structures have, it's something I would love to dig into over the, next year. We would kind of dig into it now.
We're in, 2 years ago in the last biennium. One of the things we were gonna do was run leadership master at CTE high school. And, that Senator Campion had that as a model for what he would like to see CTE come there.
I wonder if I feel like, at least from an economic development perspective, we are staring down the barrel of a gun. Like we're about to lose the programs that help fund young people. We're about to lose FEMA. We're about to lose really critical pieces of our infrastructure and our economic well-being.
And we're losing students because they can't.
Yeah.
go where what we're
Right.
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
And I just wonder if, like, as a pilot this year, we could say, you get to take your CTE tuition dollars to an accredited home building program or something. We just need to build houses right now. And, we have small programs where young people are working on they're working with Habitat for Humanity to build houses. They just don't get accredited to do that. Can we pilot this year? Because we're in a huge economic crisis. That's the way I'm looking at this. Like, it's not a theoretical conversation about do kids get tech education. We have no workforce, and we're about to lose what remaining pillars of youth-led workforce entry we have.
I don't know how to do it in 3 days.
Can we keep working on it and put a placeholder in or something?
Yeah, well, we do have the possibility of an amendment.
Yeah, can we do that? That's what everyone's been doing lately to
We
keep things moving.
we can try to carve out some time next week.
I truly have the right players thinking about this. And this is Sabina Haskell should be coming in and saying, she's the new workforce star. I don't know what we're paying for. Love her, but
I think our current CPE system is not what it needs to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if kids are getting turned away, that's a crime this year. We cannot have that happening this year.
So
Thank you.
Yeah.
So now I'm off my soapbox, but thank you.
Well, I'm hearing it from my constituents, that you guys are gonna wrap this plan around CTE, you need them. And part of the reason why CTE tuition was 17,000, it was more, is because they're having difficulty getting instructors because they could be out there in the workforce and make a big.
Yeah, remember that, we had that testimony, that's a problem.
That's a problem.
There's a built-in disincentive in some districts to send kids because they lose all the dollars following. There's a lot of issues. And a lot of need. Okay, going back to the bill and getting about specifics here, we've got work being done by the 3 people who can do work for us. Are we at the point where we've any other big issues to discuss?
I have a governance question. So Senator Rom Hinsdale brought up earlier, and it's a good point, is supervisory unions and the role of supervisory unions in this organization structure. I'd like to understand the organization between the Secretary of Education to the principal on what these districts are supposed to do. And what are you going to call, and why are you going to call them what you call them, and what implication does that name have on
Yeah, so let's make sure we're talking about here. So we have supervisory districts, which are larger districts who also perform the functions of a supervisory committee. That's like, it's in Chittenden County.
I know, I don't know what it's doing, but there's
Yeah.
too much bureaucracy, like
You've got SPs as opposed to supervisory unions because they're self-contained.
but they're not school districts, they're supervisory districts laid over a school district.
You see the need?
Yeah, no, I'm not
Why
arguing.
can't we just put it on paper?
Well, I'm not
This is the
arguing,
intent.
trying to figure out what we're actually, when you say that, who maybe, that's something Beth could do, actually.
Yeah,
That's something Beth can
that
do.
would be nice.
Okay. Okay,
Can we get rid of some layers of bureaucracy?
and let's just make
But
sure.
what, yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if we're not, then what's here?
Well, I think some constructs, and we'll get to this, require an SU. A construct
Mhm.
with non-operating districts
Mhm.
require an SU.
But who we haven't heard from are the business administrator folks. They're such a critical piece of all of this. And they know where all the efficiencies are. They know where they're spending money that's not going to students, like if anybody does. And if we could listen to them talk about how bureaucracy adds cost and how we could achieve our goals while getting rid of bureaucracy, I would like to hear from them, FASBO. We haven't heard from
They
them.
know the best place to put the boundary line.
They know where the bodies are buried, and we have not heard from them.
So you're talking about getting in
FASBO.
VASBO is,
It's the school business I don't know. Officials, school business officials.
officials.
They're the business managers of all the district. They're the ones who manage the budget.
And what's the question?
How do we find efficiencies and cut through bureaucracy with this proposal? And I know they could come in and talk about some of the things we've been talking about and comment on where they see more efficiencies that could be gained while we achieve the same education goals.
And they would love to start with the organization chart. They would like to see the organization and then figure out if that is in fact a worthy goal and if it creates the efficiencies that we're expecting it to.
Is what creates the efficiencies? You say it,
The
reorganization.
districts, reorganization. transformation.
Policies that everything. They're responsible for all of that, whether or not all of that bureaucracy adds value and savings or does not.
They know where they spend the money too. So they know the vendors, you know, where they get the services, you know.
I have no objection about, I'm not objecting to anything, but this is that's a year's worth of work. Figure
An org
it
chart?
out, not the org chart.
For me, it's the org chart.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Yeah,
we have to have a common language, and I'm not sure. we have a
Right.
common language.
right.
And have the definition.
And when, I think it doesn't have to be wedded to anything in the bill. That's why I just asked to soften the language.
I
about
think
how
it
the
needs to be
maps are
wedded
configured.
into the task force.
Exactly. That's exactly
Exactly
what,
I was thinking.
yeah.
Um,
But it would be nice if we heard from them as a committee next week after the bill checks out. or
Okay.
the week.
so,
No,
yeah. So we could be thinking in the very short run about how to work this into the task force, which the org charts, that's it.
that's
Okay.
one thing I asked for with the looking at whether supervised, all of that bureaucracy needs to exist to deliver choice or whatever we're working toward.
Um, Yeah, one thing I do know is true, so, you know, in order to have, if you have different operating structures, you have, it has to, I say I know, it has to be under the confines of an SU, but that's why we did SUs, we did mostly supervising
Right.
districts and some SUs.
And I'll be honest, I totally was like, this is your thing and I'll try to just tune out. And let you do that. But if if the business folks can come in and say there's a more efficient way to do all of this than have 7 boards that still have to share resources, you know, but we still have flexibility in operations. I would like to look at that. Would like to pay money.
Well, you know, to do that, then, well, it's next testimony and
Yeah.
getting our arms around it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Are they gonna talk about, you know, like common level of person? I know that, you know, because we're never gonna have equity unless every town is reappraised. And
yeah.
to one standard.
What did we leave off with that, last year, Julian, when we were working on, was it a year ago, last year, the year before?
Yeah, so last year, the yield bill, included the statewide adjustment, which essentially rebased the CLA. So instead of comparing to 100% of fair market value, it's compared against statewide average. So we still have the CLA. The CLA still exists. The other piece of the bill that this committee is not working on, which is in finance, is the regional assessment districts, which gets to the point of regional reappraisal.
Yeah, I just got a letter from a bunch of listers. They're not happy because state's trying to take over their business.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad you stayed that way.
So other big moving pieces people want to talk about or
I feel like
leave
we're
out
getting
or, yeah.
Not a huge moving piece, but since we're talking about a 3 to 4 to 5 year timeline, I would like to give in the AOE report section, I'd like to have the AOE develop and maintain a project schedule that allows us all to visually understand year by year what's happening, so we can share this with constituents and superintendents, and we can begin to market the whole plan from 40,000 feet.
That's all part of the strategic plan. It's their goals, objectives, and, you know, timeline.
Okay, well, we don't have a strategic
Right.
plan. We have
Well,
a
mentioned it here.
special ed strategic plan.
Right.
Yeah,
So when you say strategic plan, there's the notion of a timeline, what happens in each year, is that what you're thinking about?
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Okay,
And if,
I'm not-
if
I didn't
it's a
mention
date,
that.
and if you didn't get there, why not? And it,
Well, what moving pieces have to happen in sequence, what are in parallel, you know, it's a big deal. And, you know, this is something, again, huge transformation. We don't really understand where we're going.
just decision support template. That's what I was looking for there. Where you're supposed to be at the star by July 2026 and you're not there. So you gotta drop back and figure out why, and then you gotta go someplace else, because you gotta meet those timelines.
so from July 1/25
Yep.
until
5 years.
Early transition.
Yeah.
And then a year, I'd say, after the transformation, at least, because we've got to be factoring in school construction and
Yeah, because the people are gonna have to make this happen, even know what the timeline is.
and very visual, very,
Yeah.
not something in words, and take all the words, extract, create one schedule.
I'll just say, I mean, because I don't want you to hear it from like Baker or somewhere else, and I don't have the language drafted, but I have tax proposals that I'm gonna be pitching to Senate Finance. And I think there's a real opportunity to shape property value and use policy through how we structure this tax, not education policy. I mean, it should really be about vacancy and, you know, behaviors that limit the grand list growth in certain communities and how they should pay more for that than communities that are growing their grand list. So I also have a piece of that is vice taxes and youth mental health, because I just feel like we never have that conversation anywhere because there's no money and it's just this growing piece of the pie for schools. But I think I would like us somewhere to be forced to have the conversation about youth mental health and funding that through other sources than the property tax.
It has to include taxes either going down or not going up.
Well, not if it relieves the property tax. That was the rule that we were supposed to live by this year. If it alleviates pressure on the property tax, I see it as valid for conversation.
But in the end, people realize that our special ed property tax was hinged to education. Our education costs are way above everybody else. And that's why we're over here.
When the foundation formula went up from 13,200 to $15,033, I heard it. Oh my God, our taxes are going to go up again. You know, just that visual of now we're going to get, statewide, it's going to be more. They're equating that to taxes. Some of these people are underwater. I mean, they can't. They're working 3 jobs and can't make ends meet in my district. So.
I hear you. I'm trying to relieve the property tax burden, because we've put a lot of unfunded mandates on top of the education fund.
This whole state is about fees and permit fees and, raising registration for vehicles and they're tired. And I don't know how you fix it, but.
Well, if phone-free schools requires money, it should come from somewhere because phones are what's driving our mental health crisis.
That's certainly part of it. I wish they'd never been better. So good for today?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a very tight time frame. We're putting a lot on JFO and Ledge Council. So just be prepared to be here as long as we need to the next couple of nights in particular, and hopefully have those done by Friday. But
Yeah,
not have to stay late. But if we do, we do, obviously.
yeah,
Just we got to get this done.
Yeah.
And we're doing a lot of things. Getting this thing up and running. We've had this discussion, but we're in an era of cuts right now, and they're sort of haphazard everywhere. Getting this thing up and running is critical. Or things are going to come unglued, and we're doing that. We're leaving. Again, we can have more discussion about this, but we're putting in place this commission with the 2 task force with the 2 charges. We're setting us up for getting this thing done. It's going to work, but so I said at a forum last night. Next year, it's just as important as this year because which is consistent with what you're talking about. We got a hell of a lot to get done next year as well.
So I don't know the numbers, but I was surprised this year that even with the 9.5% increase in education tax rate, whether it ends up being that or not, that most of the school budget's passed. And I'll tell you what I heard was that people know that change is coming. They're looking forward to it. And
I think we heard that we ended up cutting 400 positions statewide, and that might be what needed to happen. We lost, some schools cut music, theater, other things that really shouldn't. So we got to fix the system. So we're doing it. Okay, we're done. Thanks.
I do have a scheduling question. I don't know if we're going to be live or not, but it sounds like John is with us for a limited time this week.
I think we're only losing him tomorrow. We should be good with everyone.
Okay, so
And
we should.
Thursday.
Okay, so those 2 days we should plan on going late to just go through everything with John. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I just didn't know. Yeah, we were losing sooner.
If you want to go through the parts of the bill that. Yeah. Okay.